Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to just think for a second about the beliefs you hold most dear. Those ideas you consider to be undeniable truths about the world, about morality, maybe about success. We all have them, right? They're basically the invisible houses we live inside every single day. They keep us feeling safe, they keep us grounded. But how often do you actually walk down into the basement of your own mind and inspect the foundation? If we're being completely honest, we rarely do. It's dark, it's dusty down there, and honestly, it is deeply uncomfortable to confront the possibility that the very walls holding up our entire worldview might be, well, riddled with cracks. So today, we're going to grab a flashlight and learn how to actually stress test our mental foundations using an ancient, highly effective blueprint for finding the truth. We are demystifying the architecture of Socratic inquiry. And look, this is a method designed not to attack your beliefs, but to reveal what is truly solid in our thinking. I want to start off by asking you a seemingly simple question about your foundational beliefs, just to see how sturdy they really are. Ready? Is lying always wrong? Take a quick second to actually answer that in your head. Well, if you were raised like most people, you were probably handed a very clear moral brick pretty early in life by your parents or your teachers. Telling a lie is a bad thing. It's just a foundational rule of a functioning society. So when you get asked this question, your immediate knee-jerk reaction is probably to nod confidently and say, yes, absolutely, lying is always wrong. It feels like a completely solid, immovable, load-bearing wall. But what happens when we introduce a glaring exception? Imagine for a moment you are hiding an innocent person from someone who intends to do them severe physical harm. That aggressor knocks on your front door, looks you dead in the eye, and asks if anyone is inside. Suddenly, telling the truth becomes a profoundly immoral act. Lying, in this specific high-stakes scenario, is literally the only way to save a life. The morality shifts entirely from black and white to this really complex shade of gray. And just like that, our seemingly unbreakable wall of lying is always wrong develops a massive, undeniable crack. This exact tension, the sudden realization that our simple rules just don't easily cover every angle of reality, that is the very spark of our topic today. So, moving to section 1, the architect of questions. Socrates and the blueprint of inquiry. Let's actually meet our architect, Socrates. Living in ancient Athens, Socrates didn't write books. He didn't give long, sweeping lectures to packed amphitheaters. Instead, he just walked around the city striking up conversations. He operated way more like a structural engineer than your typical philosopher. He would gently tap on the load-bearing walls of his fellow citizens' thoughts just to see if they were hollow inside. And the absolutely crucial point here is this definition of Socratic inquiry. A collaborative stress test. Notice the word collaborative. This is the polar opposite of a modern internet debate. On social media, an argument is basically a battle between enemies where the ultimate goal is to completely destroy the other person. But Socratic inquiry? It's two people working together, shoulder to shoulder against a flimsy idea. You are using structured, targeted questions to purposefully dismantle weak assumptions. Why? Because, well, you cannot build a skyscraper on a swamp. You have to actively clear away those weak, unexamined assumptions first, so that the actual, nuanced truth can stand on a solid, unbreakable foundation. Let's look at Section 2, Blueprint of the Method, the construction and demolition phase. Okay, so what are the actual tools of this method? How do we tear down and rebuild a concept? It's actually a very specific, repeatable blueprint. Here's the scaffolding for the whole process, broken down into 3 distinct steps. Step 1, you start with a hypothesis. This is usually a broad, slightly shaky claim that feels true on the surface, just like our lying is always wrong example from earlier. Then comes step 2, the demolition phase. And here's the kicker. You don't just wait to stumble upon an exception, you swing the wrecking ball by actively hunting for one. You put the idea into a mental wind tunnel and push it to its absolute extreme, just to see where it breaks. Now, once the idea shatters, you don't just walk away from the mess. You move to step 3. You pour a sturdier foundation by formulating a brand new hypothesis. This new claim has to successfully incorporate both the original idea and that new exception. The goal isn't necessarily to magically arrive at perfect absolute truth right away, but to be significantly less wrong than you were a few minutes ago. So let's see how an idea evolves in real time under the pressure of a really great question. Consider an initial statement, a super common cultural belief. Courage is never retreating. I mean, it sounds heroic, right? It sounds like something straight out of a great movie. But then the architect steps in with the Socratic question. Wait, hold on. What about a brilliant military general who orders a tactical retreat designed to lure the enemy into a narrow valley, springing a trap to ultimately win the battle and save their soldiers? Is that general cowardly? Well, the answer is clearly no. That is brilliant leadership. So the initial myth of never retreating completely collapses. And from that rubble, we build the revised statement. Courage is acting wisely in the face of danger. This new definition is incredibly resilient. It allows for charging forward, sure, but it also allows for strategic restraint. It's waterproof. It survived the stress test. Which brings us to Section 3, the power of confusion. Navigating the rubble. Right. So after the demolition phase, when your long-held belief has just been proven completely inadequate, you're essentially left standing in the rubble of your own assumptions. And that brings us to a vital and honestly often deeply uncomfortable emotional step in this architectural process. You hit a state the ancient Greeks called aporia. It literally translates to being at a loss, or a state of puzzled confusion. Think about that hot, flushed feeling you get in your cheeks when someone decisively proves you wrong in a conversation. Most of us instantly get defensive, right? We double down. We absolutely hate the feeling of being disoriented. You thought you knew exactly what courage was, or what justice was, and suddenly you realize you have no idea. But hitting this state of aporia is actually cause for celebration. Aporia reframes that physical discomfort as a fundamentally good thing. It's a neurological clearing of the lot. It means the wrecking ball did its job perfectly. You are finally cleared of false confidence, and you're finally ready to build something real. And this ties perfectly into the famous Socratic paradox, I know that I know nothing. Socrates was considered the wisest man in Athens, not because he had this massive encyclopedia of facts crammed in his head, but because he was literally the only one entirely aware of his own ignorance. We really need to contrast this Socratic ignorance with actual ignorance. In a modern world filled with loud know-it-alls who constantly project absolute certainty, intellectual humility, that willingness to acknowledge a cleared lot is an absolute superpower. Normalizing this feeling of knowing nothing is a feature, not a bug of this mental architecture. Because think about it, if you already think your cup is completely full of answers, you cannot pour any fresh knowledge into it. You can't pour new concrete into a foundation that is already full of junk. Let's look at Section 4, Building Better Truths Today, the Modern Application. Now, you might be thinking a 2,000-year-old philosophical trick is just for dusty textbooks, but the reality is actually quite the opposite. This ancient scaffolding is actively holding up some of our most critical modern institutions today. In law schools, professors famously use the Socratic Method through the terrifying cold call. They force students to defend their legal interpretations against relentless, highly specific hypothetical exceptions, slowly forging them into bulletproof lawyers. In therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, practitioners use Socratic questioning to gently dismantle their patient's cognitive distortions. When a patient says, "Everyone at work hates me," a therapist doesn't just disagree. They ask for the evidence, hunting for exceptions until that irrational wall crumbles. The scientific method itself is essentially a giant institutionalized Socratic exercise, proposing a hypothesis and then aggressively trying to break it through rigorous peer review and experimentation. Even in tech, user experience, or UX design, relies heavily on this. Designers stress test software by asking, what if the user clicks the absolute wrong button right here? Anticipating those extreme exceptions is exactly how you prevent a multi-million-dollar software crash. This blueprint is literally everywhere. Which brings us right back to you and the foundation of your own mind. We've explored the blueprint, we've swung the wrecking ball, and we've seen how clearing away the rubble of bad assumptions allows us to build bulletproof truths. So I'll leave you with this challenge. Over the next 24 hours, I want you to deliberately examine your own mental architecture. Pick just one deeply held belief of yours, maybe an assumption you make about success, a rule you have about relationships, or even a narrative you tell about yourself. What is just waiting for a wrecking ball? Don't be afraid of the demolition. Grab a hard hat, ask the really tough questions, and start building a sturdier truth. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.